All right. Are there any Universal Monster fans in the house? Okay, you know, just the other day we announced a brand new house that continues the Universal Monsters legacy at Halloween Horror Nights. Started in 2018 with Universal Monsters. This is the 6th that we have done at Universal Studios Hollywood, and this one is called Universal Monsters Eternal Bloodlines. So what's different about this house? This is the first time we've ever done a completely female-centric take on the Universal Monsters, using characters that are rooted in our film history, except one which we invented, which I'll tell you about in just a second. But bringing these characters to light that maybe are lesser known than some of our, standard characters that everybody knows. We did this in collaboration with our colleagues at Universal Orlando. So Chris and I worked with their team to create this original story. So this is a completely original story. And I'm going to show you the monsters. So let's meet the monsters. Let's start with the heroines. Saskia von Helsing. This is a completely original character. Doesn't exist in the novel, doesn't exist in the films. And I should give credit to the great Crash McCreary. Do you guys know Crash? Legendary creature creator. He works with us on the Universal Monsters franchise. He does all the key art for the posters. He drew this gorgeous picture of Saskia von Helsing. Crash has been in the movie industry. He started with Stan Winston back in the Terminator days. Worked on Terminator. He helped design Edward Scissorhands, the Jurassic Park films, Pirates of the Caribbean, on and on and on. But every year we get to work with Crash, and this is his artwork. So Saskia is the last descendant of this guy, Abraham von Helsing, the famed monster hunter from our 1931 film Dracula. All of his other descendants, who are all male, have all died. They've all been killed by Dracula's daughter. Why? Because this dude killed her dad. Do you remember the end of Dracula? He drives a stake through the heart of Dracula, and that's it.
Spoiler.
So Dracula's daughter is on a vendetta to wipe out the Von Helsing family, and Saskia is the last one left. Now we paired her with the Bride of Frankenstein, inspired by our 2021 house, The Bride of Frankenstein Lives. Do you remember that house? People have been saying, oh, you gotta bring her back, you gotta bring her back. We listened to you guys. I was like, we gotta bring the bride back. She's such a great character, such a great house. We've kind of taken, and this is Crash's artwork again, and it's inspired by what Lucas Colshaw on our team drew for the Monster Hunter look from Bride of Frankenstein Lives. And of course, she's inspired by our 1935 film, The Bride of Frankenstein, which she is in for exactly, 5 minutes, right? It's so great that the bride has continued to live despite her entire film career being 5 minutes. And then there's the villains. I mentioned this one. Dracula's daughter, that comes from a real Universal movie. It was 1936. The Countess Maria Zaleska. It was Dracula's daughter. It was the first sequel they made to Dracula. This is Crash's artwork for the mid-transformation look of Dracula's daughter. But we thought, okay, cool, let's take that farther. So when she gets fully transformed, she looks like this. You guys cool if I share a sneak peek? Yeah. A little makeup. So this is Patrick McGee Effects, our longtime makeup artist. This is his sculpt for the mid-transformed Dracula's daughter. And then we decided to bring, a couple Easter eggs, a couple of little surprises from the past. Some I'll tell you about, some I won't. We decided to bring one of Dracula's brides back. So this is the mask for Dracula's bride. She factors into the story. And then we decided to pair this character with 2 other female Universal monsters, starting with the She-Wolf, inspired by our 1946 film, The She-Wolf of London. Has anybody ever seen, seriously, yeah. She-Wolf of London? Anybody?
Yes.
What's weird about that movie? Is there a werewolf in that movie? No. There's none. There is no werewolf in She-Wolf of London. It's kind of a gaslight story. They're trying to convince this woman that she's turning into the werewolf and killing all these people, but she isn't. It never happens. We took an artistic license with that, and we turned her into this. And this is artwork done by our very own Lucas Colshaw. And this is Patrick McGee's sculpt for the She-Wolf of London. All right, the last of the female monsters, Anck-su-namun. Inspiration, our 1932 film, The Mummy. In that movie, Imhotep, who gets reincarnated as Ardith Bey, becomes obsessed with this woman named Helen, who's up on screen right now. And he wants to take her and sacrifice her so he can turn her back into his long-lost love, Anck-su-namun. So we took that idea, and we ran with it, and we created this. So this is the look of our female mummy in our experience. You recognize the amulet of Ra that she's wearing around her neck. That's a throwback to our 2022 house, Universal Monsters Legends Collide. That's what the mummy was wearing. And then this is Patrick McGee's sculpt for Anck-su-namun. And I'm in love with this cute little cobra that he sculpted, because that's part of her headband. So that is our monsters. Now, they are joined together in what we call the Unholy Alliance. So Dracula's daughter is the most powerful one. You know, in the film, Dracula has the power of mind control. So she is at the top of this pyramid, and then down below is Anck-su-namun and the She-Wolf of London. Dracula's daughter is controlling these characters in order to help her wipe out the Von Helsings. Now the story, I'm just going to share a couple of pieces of artwork that Lucas created to help tell our story. Our story starts in Amsterdam. Why? Because that's where the Von Helsing family is from in the original novel. It starts at a funeral. The last male descendant of Abraham von Helsing has just died at the hands of Dracula's daughter. Saskia von Helsing is at the funeral. She's mourning the death of her brother. There's still a few mourners that are hanging around, but it's really cold, it's snowing. But in the distance, you can see in this image on the right-hand side, I think that's on your right, yes, is one of the vampire brides from our Bride of Frankenstein Lives house. She's been sent by Dracula's daughter as an assassin to take out Saskia at the funeral. Just take care of them all at once. But someone else has showed up, an unexpected guest. And that's the Bride of Frankenstein. You can see her hiding off to the left side of the image. She has followed Dracula's bride to this location. Why? Because that's what she was doing in our 2021 house. She was hunting Dracula's brides. So it just happens to converge on this day, at this moment, where the Bride of Frankenstein is there to kill Dracula's bride, and Dracula's bride is trying to kill Saskia von Helsing, so it causes them to form an unlikely alliance between monster hunter and monster. So together they travel to the source. If you're going to go to the source, you have to go to Transylvania. That's where Castle Dracula is. Particularly an area that's mentioned in the book and the movie called the Borgo Pass. We've added our own touches to this, little Vad the Impaler influence of all these impaled corpses. They're getting out of the black coach and they're getting ready to go to Dracula's castle to face this threat. They do something during this house that you should never do in a horror movie. What should you never do in a horror movie if there's two or more people? Split up. Yeah, never a good idea. But they do. Saskia peels off to deal with Dracula's daughter and Dracula's brides. The Bride of Frankenstein peels off to deal with the She-Wolf and an Anck-su-namun. And I'm going to leave it there as far as the story. I don't want to spoil everything. Just want to give you a little tease. But I do want to talk about this, the location of where this house is, because it's really cool. Stage 12 on the Universal front line. Why is this cool? Well, to tell you why this is cool, it's time for a history lesson that's slightly longer than the previous slightly longer history lesson. Okay, what I want to do today, seriously, I just want to take you through the highlights of all the amazing films that have shot inside the soundstage, because this is ground zero, not only for the American horror film, but for movie making in general, because this stage was built in 1928, okay? It's one of the biggest sound stages in the world. At the time it was built, I think it was the biggest sound stage in the world. It's still to this day in the top 10. But it was built specifically for this movie in 1929 when it came out. It was called Broadway. That's a behind-the-scenes still I pulled from our archive, showing how big that set was inside Stage 12. There's a weird-looking contraption in the middle of that. What is that? That is the very first camera crane. The camera crane was actually invented for this movie. So right from the beginning, this soundstage was associated with film history. In the 1930s, in 1930 to be exact, it was also used for another musical called The King of Jazz. They built a giant piano with like 5 different guys playing it and a full orchestra on top. And this movie today is really only famous for one thing. It's famous for the fact that Bing Crosby made his movie debut in King of Jazz in this movie when he was part of a trio, singing trio called the Rhythm Boys. And there's Bing filming inside Stage 12. Now you're going, John, what does this have to do with horror? This is what it has to do with horror. We're going to bring it back to horror right now. Because in 1931, Stage 12 was used to build the interior of Dracula's castle. You know this scene, right? Not only is this one of the most famous movie lines in all of horror movie history, it's one of the famous movie lines in all of movie history. Children of the night, what music they make. That was uttered inside Stage 12. And I brought this little treat from our archive. We still have the original set drawing in our archive. This is from 1931, this is from Dracula. This is the production designer's sketch for what that set would look like. And then in the same year, in 1931, it was used again for Frankenstein. This was Dr. Frankenstein's lab. That's where that was shot. One of the most famous scenes in movie history, not only horror movies, but all of movies, it's alive. That happened inside the soundstage. And then in 1935, it was used for The Bride of Frankenstein. Now, I always, whenever I share movie history with people, I always try to convey to them like how big that set was, because I don't think you really get an appreciation for it. So I brought a behind-the-scenes still, the image on the right there. That's how big that set was from 1935. It was also used, of course, in Bride of Frankenstein for another classic scene. When the bride is first unveiled, Frankenstein is all eager to have his friend, and he goes and puts a hand on her, and she hisses at him like a cat, and then he says the immortal line as he puts his hand on the lever, "We belong dead." Pulls the switch, blows the castle to hell. That's all Stage 12. So moving on, into the 1950s, it was used for a famous Jimmy Stewart movie called Harvey, right? And I know at this point in the tour, you're going, what does that have to do with horror? It was used for the interior of the Harvey Mansion. Why does the Harvey Mansion have anything to do with horror? This is why. That's the same set, the exterior of the Harvey Mansion on Colonial Street, right? On the Universal backlot. Does that top of that house look familiar? Psycho. That was a stock set, stock unit set that was later, used for Psycho as well. That when I first started coming to Universal, that house was there. I can remember that as a kid because I'm so old. In 1960, Stanley Kubrick filmed Spartacus inside the soundstage. It was the Roman Senate scene from that film. And this has nothing to do with anything, but I just was going through all my, years ago in 2000, I put the video monitors on the trams, and I oversaw that whole project. So I did all this research on our film industry and went through all of the archive, all of the photographs, the behind-the-scenes stills, and I came across this one years ago, and I just thought, this is so Kubrick. He numbered all the dead people. Number 265, I can see you breathing. I'm sure that's why he did that. And in the 70s, Universal was famous for its disaster movies. Earthquake, the Airport film series, the Hindenburg, all of the biggest scenes of that movie, those were filmed inside that soundstage. And then moving on into the 1980s, again, another musical, The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas, Dolly Parton and Burt Reynolds. The Chicken Ranch set for that film was originally built inside Stage 12. It was designed to open like a dollhouse so they could film exterior scenes and interior scenes. And I know what you're thinking, what does this have to do with horror? Well, that set's still there, kids. Have you seen it? Yep. Sitting out on the back lot at Universal, we call it the Chicken Ranch. That's the same house Rob Zombie turned into the House of 1,000 Corpses. And then also in the 80s, two films that have lasted the test of time, Scarface, Say Hello to My Little Friend, filmed inside Stage 12. Back to the Future, that was the interior of Doc's house in Back to the Future. It was also used for some insert shots of the clock tower. When Doc Brown's up on top of the clock tower, they filmed all of that at Courthouse Square, but they also built just the part of the top clock tower for some insert shots inside Stage 12, so both of those movies filmed inside there. Psycho 3, directed by Anthony Perkins. That was the interior of the Psycho house. The Bates Mansion was filmed inside that soundstage. And right after this, brief little personal story, I started Universal in 1989 as a tour guide, right? And on my days off back then, you could call up the studio and say, hey, I'd like to shadow a production, and they'd hook you up with a production. In '89, I spent the whole summer on the set of Back to the Future 2, every single chance I got, watching them film that movie. But one day I was out by the Psycho house and I saw Anthony Perkins up on those steps, and what he was filming was the introduction for the Alfred Hitchcock show that used to be in Universal Orlando. And I stood in the base motel and watched Mr. Perkins film that whole scene. I was on this set too. This is 1993. At that time, we were brought on. I had left Universal after I left being a tour guide. I worked as a production assistant when we built that whole downstairs section of the theme park, the Starway escalator, the old special effects show. And then after that, the only time I ever left Universal, I was gone for 5 years, and I was working for another company that used to do industrials, which are like business meetings, and they would daisy chain like 1 million slide projectors together because there wasn't even video projectors back then. But one day we got a call to come to a meeting at Amblin to meet with Steven Spielberg's producers, Kathleen Kennedy, and talk about filming a scene for Jurassic Park. So I worked on Jurassic Park for about 2 days. Don't look for me in the credits, I'm not in there. We consulted on the scene when it's the Mr. DNA and the whole like business plan of Jurassic Park. But in that meeting, they showed me a piece of key art of a rendering of what the Discovery Center was gonna look like, and it was this exact scene. And that scene was filmed inside Stage 12. I was on this set too, Casper, 1995. All of Woodstaff Manor was built inside Stage 12. I was on this set too, in 2000. When I was doing the studio tour, I wanted somebody to be the host, and I went to Ron Howard and asked him if he would be gracious enough to be the host of our first, version of the studio tour where we had the video monitors on board the tram. And I went on that set. They built the entire town of Whoville inside Stage 12. And then in the early 2000s, that was Bruce Banner's Underground Lab for the Hulk. And then in 2009, I was invited back to that soundstage again to meet Sid and Marty Krofft. Do you guys know Sid and Marty Krofft?
Yeah.
HR Puffin stuff?
Yeah. Yeah.
Sigma the Sea Monster? The Bugaloos?
Yeah.
Dr. Shrinker? Bigfoot and Wild Boy? Now I've lost you. I met Sid and Marty Krofft on the set of this. It was the Sleestacks temple in that film. And they were asking me like, oh, we're just gonna tear down this set. Is there anything you want? Is there anything you want? I was doing Horror Nights by this time. So I took one thing. I took that ice cream van.
Oh my God.
Do you recognize that?
Yeah, Sweet Licks.
That was in Clowns 3D. The reason that clown was called Sweet Licks is because it's painted right on that ice cream van. I didn't have to change it. It later became Hollywood Harry's van. It became Larry Larva's van. And this year it's getting a complete remodel. Note to self, this hasn't been announced. It's getting a complete remodel for something I can't talk about. All right, moving on. In 2011, The Voice came in and took over that soundstage, and they filmed, I think, 17 seasons of The Voice inside there. And now they've moved to a new soundstage, which means now you guys, for the first time ever, get to go inside that soundstage. I practically grew up on this lot, and like I mentioned, I started as a tour guide. All of my days off, I would always go inside sound stages, and I would always think about the film history of all these great movies that filmed inside there. So just to close out this section, that's a behind-the-scenes still from the making of The Bride of Frankenstein. You imagine, tea time. They're all English. They were all English actors. They had tea on the set every day. Or, you can imagine Boris Karloff having a toasty, The Bride of Frankenstein checking her makeup in a mirror. This is all Stage 12. This is ground zero for the American horror movie, right? And it's tied to so much film history. So I hope you guys appreciate it when you get to go see Universal Monsters, Eternal Bloodlines inside the World Family Soundstage 12. How about another announcement? Let's talk about the music of the Monsters. But wait a minute. Has this been announced yet?
No.
Slash. Now Slash is coming back again to do his 6th score for Universal Monsters, his 7th for us at Halloween Horror Nights. You guys, all the time, I run into fans of Halloween Horror Nights at the event, and you tell me what you want. You're not shy about it. And the one thing that I've heard over and over and over is, when are you going to do like an album with the music from Universal Monsters? For the first time ever this year at Halloween Horror Nights, you'll be able to get a limited edition vinyl album featuring selections of all of the different houses that Slash has done up until this point. This is the interior sleeve, you know, the opening of the album. This is the inside. Features all of Crash's iconic artwork. I wrote the dedication. Stacy Quinolti on our team, who works with Slash, who does co-writes the music, arranges it, produces it. He remastered all of these tracks, especially for vinyl. So this year, you will finally get that album that you've been asking me for years and years and years.